The forest had always been a place of peace for her. The little beauty, tugging at the cloak of the hooded man, peered into his eyes. Without letting go of his hands, the girl asked how soon they would see each other again. After all, when he left, he broke her heart. Being the baby's only friend, the man played with her with pleasure. After all, the uncle was a kind person. But now, stroking the girl's head, he said that for now he had to leave her. However, he promised to return soon. The little girl wanted to know how long her uncle would be gone. While waiting for an answer, the girl did not let go of the man's cloak. However, he did not know what to answer the little beauty, because he understood that it was possible that they would see each other for the last time. He sat down and gently stroked her cheeks, begging her not to be upset. The man asked her to believe and wait for him. But the upset blonde only cried bitterly, and the uncle understood that he had to say goodbye, because his heart was breaking into pieces. Pressing his knees tightly to his chest, he promised that he would return as soon as she very much desired it. And the girl thought only about the fact that this was the man with whom, for the first time after birth, she experienced the bitterness of separation. She tried to remember him with her childish, short memory. After all, the time spent with him was filled with happiness. She couldn't be upset with her uncle. In her upset feelings, she only asked him not to leave, but he was in a hurry, and her small and trembling heart felt that they would not meet again. Turning around and looking at the girl, he already knew how difficult life would be for her. However, the next moment, having come to her senses and opening her tear-stained eyes, the frightened blonde realized that it was just a dream. The dim light from the broken window fell in spots on the concrete, and the girl lying on the floor with disheveled hair and clothes torn from beatings was clearly freezing. She was conscious but unable to move, and the man who approached her was already reminding the beauty that she was strong and could handle everything. "Perhaps the girl should have been punished further?" asked the young man, who sat down on a chair and looked at her carefully. Trying to get up from the icy floor, the girl said that she didn't care. After all, she had long since stopped resisting the circumstances. He liked to tease her, especially when he saw the resemblance of the blonde to her mother, who was just as proud. But looking into the eyes of her half-brother, the girl, tortured by beatings, already said that he was certainly behaving as befits an emperor. He was irritated by such remarks from his sister. At such moments, Raph believed that the girl had not been punished severely enough for her sharp tongue. Clenching his fists, he again reminded her that she was only an illegitimate child, and therefore could not at all consider herself part of the imperial blood. Realizing that she was a fake princess made him angry. Raph couldn't accept that someone who wasn't born for the throne was suddenly so close to him. And the very next moment, drops of blood from the sister's tender back were already flying across the concrete walls of the basement. A muffled whistle, cutting through the silence, brought pain and suffering to the innocent beauty. After all, touching the skin, it tore off scraps of her flesh. Raph demanded that the girl scream, but all he saw was her body shaking and her muscles tensing. Her power was destroying him. It seemed that the beauty had resigned herself. After all, there were no tears in her eyes, only glass emptiness. But even this was not enough for Raph. Swinging again and again, he waited for emotions from his sister. After all, he needed a scream and a plea for salvation. But the girl only steadfastly endured the beatings that spread throughout her body, from her spine to her fingertips. However, she noted that her older brother began to bully her even more when he ascended the throne. Clinging to her memories, she was already carried away to the time when her father, the previous emperor of the Calyx Empire, brought her and her mother to the imperial palace. The resulting family was rather strange. After all, besides them, the empress and the heir to the throne lived in the palace. But soon the parents died, and Raph started to bully her, which could not be stopped. The girl begged him to stop it, but the brother wanted to see her obey him. The constant bullying of his sister clearly gave him pleasure. The body was burning, as if the girl had been thrown into a fire, and the brother, striking blow after blow, only demanded that she ask forgiveness for her mistakes. Bitter tears flowed down the princess's face. Celeste did not understand what her fault was, because she lived in a closed room separate from the palace, a quiet life of a hermit. But he seemed not to hear her. There was no longer any strength to resist. The body, tortured by endless beatings, ached, and her brother, a psychopath and sadist, still did not stop. There was no more strength to endure. Celeste simply asked her brother to kill her, but her brother did not understand who would benefit from this. And then she asked him to hit harder, and after such words, the brother's face, swelling with anger, turned red. Cursing at the girl, He squeezed the whip to such an extent that his hands turned white from the tension, and she, still sitting on the floor, did not understand what was the reason for his anger. After all, he had been beating her for 2 months already. The fallen whip, hitting the floor with a dull thud, reminded the beauty that her upbringing was over for today. Looking over her shoulder, she looked at her brother. She saw that the aggression had passed, and she knew that she could catch her breath. And the blonde, suddenly calming down, was already putting himself in order. He was tired of beating his sister, and now he was quietly talking about it. Celeste didn't understand what would follow. But now her brother was reminding her that since the princess was breaking orders, he had no reason to leave her here. And also, looking at the torture device, Raph reported that he had some good news for the girl. And the first news was the ball, which was starting today. Squatting down in front of his sister, he said that as soon as it was over, he would kick her out. But smiling, the Emperor was already asking Celeste what the girl was willing to sacrifice for the sake of the holiday. After all, according to the law, he had to cut off her legs. Looking at her mentally unstable brother, the girl understood that he was quite an actor. But that didn't make it any easier. She knew that terrible grin. After all, it didn't bode well. Celeste's face changed, and the man was amused. The princess screamed and was angry from pain and helplessness. After all, he could simply throw her out, and therefore the girl did not understand why the legs were cut off. But when someone from the imperial family left the palace, they were given status and maintenance. However, now she was punished, and for this, both her feet were cut off. But Raph reminded that since her father was the emperor, the girl could leave the castle with all her limbs intact and also count on maintenance. But not in this case, the brother noted. After all, she had committed a crime and therefore must be punished. But there was one thing. Celeste was the only princess in this country. Trying to touch her with his finger, he confirmed that the girl was one of the best creations of the late emperor. Stroking her cheek, he believed that his sister should not be offended by him. After all, being an illegitimate child is already a great crime. Celeste, pushing away her brother's hand, asked him not to touch her. She dreamed only of taking a bath and eating, and she also did not want to listen to stupid reasoning. However, he, having changed his rhetoric, already asked the princess not to be offended by him. After all, the laws were to blame for everything. But the girl did not choose her fate, and she was offended. Realizing that she had to get out, the beaten beauty looked with horror at the huge number of steps leading up. After all, she had no strength left to walk. Siesta leaned against the walls as she struggled to get up. Her head was spinning because she was hungry, and her legs were completely immobile. As she moved towards the sun, the princess realized that 3 days had already passed since she had been locked in the basement. A ray of sun slid across her pupils. Covering her eyes with her hands, she enjoyed the freedom. The fresh air, filling her lungs with oxygen, gave her hope for life. But she understood that all this was temporary. After all, when the holiday was over, she would lose her feet and the girl would be kicked out. After all, she knew her brother. Standing in the doorway, the girl held her head. She wanted to live so much. However, now Celeste thought that she would never see the sun again. It seemed to her that after rising from the terrible basement, she would gain strength. But only now did the blonde understand how terribly tired she was. Falling onto the cool, soft grass, the princess closed her eyes. She dreamed of only one thing, for her soul and body to calm down. And the earth, like a living organism, tried to bring relief to the girl. Opening her eyes, the blonde realized that she had to figure out how to stay on her feet. The wind whispered in her ears, and the sky breathed above her, trying to dissolve everything that troubled her heart. But the next moment, a dissatisfied voice made her shudder. And the large woman, disturbing the harmony of nature, shouted from afar that it was not right for the princess to lie like that on the grass. But when she came closer, she suddenly began to cry bitterly. After all, through the torn blouse, she could already see the girl's wounded back. The maid said that the medicine needed to be applied quickly. She asked to tell if the blonde was in pain, and she quietly accepted the woman's care and only thanked her. After all, the princess lived alone and there was no one to help her, and only Terega visited her from time to time. But the approaching voices, like dandelion fluff, brought snatches of words to the princess's ears. Celeste listened, for the two were talking about Raph. Walking on the soft grass, the men talked, but it seemed to them that only nature heard them. However, the maid had already said that a guest had come to the princess. The dirty and beaten girl was not at all happy about this event. Lost in thought, Celeste didn't know what to do. After all, she absolutely didn't want to appear in front of people like that. But in the stream of sunlight, two people were already looking at her. One of them, with his arms folded across his chest, clearly had not expected to see such a picture. Trying to get used to the bright sunlight, and in the hope of getting a better look at the men, she raised her hand to her head. The blonde, dressed in a luxurious waistcoat with a coat of arms brooch on his neck, was amazed by the picture he saw, while his companion's eyes reflected only pity, not understanding what these people wanted from her. Celeste was embarrassed, holding her torn blouse. Everything was so untimely, the girl thought. But despite her fatigue, her brain told her that she had never seen these faces. However, she saw that the men's faces had completely different emotions. After all, the blonde man with long hair was looking at her appraisingly. Celeste recognized that look immediately. Perhaps he wanted to examine the princess under the rags. Taking on a menacing look, she already said that one cannot get here without warning. And the man, standing in a stream of leaves swirling in the wind, was already saying that this was not a real princess. Of course, recalling the past 3 days, she herself would not have recognized herself as a princess, she thought, looking into the stranger's eyes. But it was very difficult to humiliate her now. She also stated that if men did invade the princess's space, they should have first introduced themselves. Celeste spoke so loudly that the servant standing behind her cowered in fear, and the beauty was already demanding to know why you came. The blonde, not expecting such pressure, looked at the princess with alarm. Now he understood what people were talking about. After all, she did not have a docile character. But the servant had already introduced Emperor Batiso of the Kalinef Empire, and they learned from Emperor Calix that Celeste was here. The princess lowered her head and changed her anger to mercy, and even tried to apologize for not recognizing the emperor. Only she didn't understand what the hell he was doing here, but she only said that she was not inviting men to come in. Calling Turkin, the emperor said that he was leaving first, and that the servant should catch up with him. However, the maid was already whispering in Celeste's ear that the man owned a huge empire, and the girl should not miss such a chance. But the young man who was eavesdropping on the conversation was already in a hurry to say that the empire of Kalinefe was much larger and much stronger than the empire of Celeste's father. At this point, the princess already understood that no one from the imperial family would come to her just like that. So there had to be a reason. And the next moment, as if reading the girl's thoughts, the emperor's servant asked the beauty to listen to him. Turning around, she looked at the guy carefully, and then said that she was ready to listen to Turkin. And indeed, as it turned out, the emperor had not come to Selena for no reason. After all, he wanted to invite the princess to the ball. The blonde could not believe her ears. Clenching her hands into a fist, she became excited. Already knowing that the empire of Kalinef was more powerful than Calix, she understood that there was a chance to get out of this swamp. Could it be that fate, in the person of Emperor Batiso, had given her a man who could defeat Raf, the princess thought, looking at the man. Looking over the young man's shoulder, Celeste did not understand where the emperor was heading. However, driven by the wind, he was already moving towards the thicket. His steps were quick but almost inaudible, as if the very ground beneath him was retreating, making way. But now the princess did not understand how the man who just a few minutes ago said that he had come especially to see her was now leaving. But the young man, noticing her sadness, asked the princess not to be upset. He promised to take the girl to the ball instead of Mr. Batiso. Extending his hand, he introduced himself. After all, he had completely forgotten that he had not done it officially. Placing his palm on his chest, the young man already said that his name was Turkin, and that he was accompanying his master. She liked this smiling and courteous young man at first sight. After all, she had never met such pleasant people in her life. Frozen in place, the princess was already asking how to address him. But Turkin said that simply by his first name, because he had neither a surname nor a rank. However, after he offered the girl his hand, he no longer seemed like an ordinary person to her. And now the princess did not believe that he did not have a title. The emperor's servant exuded a noble nature. After all, he was very well-mannered and also well-dressed. And even though the girl knew so little about the world, looking at such a person, one could say that he was an aristocrat. At some point, Turkin felt that the princess wanted to ask about something. Perhaps something important and personal. But suddenly she turned away abruptly, and the guy kept looking and looking at her, without taking his eyes off her. However, his warm smile only caused questions in the girl. But a minute later, his hand was already reaching for the princess's frightened face. The fear reflected in Celeste's soul and eyes only reminded her that the girl had thought well of him in vain. But the thought that came to her in time that perhaps she had not seen people for a long time calmed her down a little. And Turkin's hand was already touching the princess's hair. The girl shuddered, and the young man, still smiling, continued to look at her as if he saw a person he had long missed. But the next moment the brunette was already removing the leaf that had unexpectedly landed on the princess's luxurious hair. He did it so carefully, as if afraid to disturb the very air around the girl. Laughing, he showed her the find. But the girl, suddenly realizing how wild she had become lately, looked at him with shame. Her face darkened. Her insides sank. She scolded herself for her sudden fear. It was just a polite gesture. Looking at the sheet, the young man smiled, and Celeste suddenly realized how much she wanted someone to look at her the same way. Walking through the garden, the servant reminded the princess again that there was a ball in the castle today. But judging by the girl's confused face, Tekin understood that she did not know about it. The princess was worried. Perhaps that's why she forgot that Raf had told her about it. But out loud she only answered that she didn't see the need to know everything. However, turning his head slightly, the young man already said that perhaps he shouldn't tell her everything. Clutching her dress, Celeste thought that apparently other empires already knew about her. But she had no idea that the king could come to visit her personally. The blonde did not hide the fact that they most likely knew about her situation. And now Turkin was only saying that she and Mr. Batizo were in completely different situations. But suddenly the young man stopped. He again expressed Batizo's wishes to go to the ball with the princess. Even though the emperor had left her, the invitation still stood, Turkin added with a smile. Well, judging by the girl's face, she didn't trust anyone. At that moment, Celeste suddenly remembered that Raf was going to cut off his sister's legs and kick her out of the empire. However now, remembering her brother's behavior, the beauty could not understand what had to happen for him to change his mind. And now, looking at the emperor's servant, the princess tried to find an answer. But she had one more question for the young man. After all, she had absolutely no idea what she would wear to the ball. The princess had long been as poor as a stationary mouse, and Turka, smiling again, informed the girl that there was absolutely no need to worry about this. After all, a man would soon come to her who would bring a dress. He promised that the girl would look gorgeous. He was also sure that the princess would soon forget about the clothes she was currently wearing. It was like a dream. She did not believe yet that her life could change. However, the young man was saying goodbye, but he promised that he would accompany the princess to the ball. But she asked the guy to stay for a couple more minutes. After all, there was a question that was bothering her. Taking a deep breath and clasping her hands, she was already asking whether Mr. Raf would give his consent to this. Turkin's changed gaze did not escape her, and for a moment Celeste thought that there would be no answer. But the very next moment the young man said that they absolutely did not need anyone's consent for this. After all, it was an order from Mr. Batizo, the servant reminded, looking piercingly at the princess. And now his smiling eyes looked as if it had suddenly become cold on a clear day. And the girl did not yet understand what was behind it. But she was already letting the young man go, closing herself off and thinking. After all, she was terribly afraid of her brother, who, as it turned out, had not even been asked. Lost in her thoughts, Celeste realized that she could be drawn into something much more than just court intrigue. However, now it seemed to her that she only knew that Batizo was stronger than her brother. But this did not make the blonde feel any better. The modest house in which the princess lived could hardly be called a decent home. But the surrounding nature always supported the spirit of the beauty. But now, taking the dress out of the box tied with blue ribbons, the princess could not believe her eyes. The luxurious outfit, embroidered with rhinestones, pearls, and gold threads delivered by a messenger, was already lying on Celeste's bed. But would it suit her? The girl wondered. But the servant asked her not to think about it. After all, the seamstress had even made sure that the outfit had long sleeves. Without wasting any time and quickly hiding behind the screen, the beauty was already throwing off her worn-out junk. And despite the fact that her back was burning from the beatings, the princess asked Teregi about Emperor Kalanev. Trying to see Celeste, the maid stood on her tiptoes and peered through the screen. The man was called Black Wings, she said, not understanding the meaning of these words. Being a great warrior, the servants continued, he was known for his desire to expand his territories. Fastening the pearl belt on her thin waist, the princess realized that she knew absolutely nothing about her country. It must have been big, since it came to war. But the next moment the princess was already asking Toregu to help her button the buttons on her back. Coming out from behind the screen, it was noticeable that the girl was worried, wanting to make sure that she had put everything on correctly. After all, there were no mirrors in the house, but the maid, calling upon the Almighty and having lost the gift of speech, could not take her eyes off Celeste. And she only embarrassedly asked about what she had done wrong. The maid always knew that the princess was beautiful, but the dress miraculously emphasized the refinement that neither poverty nor pain could hide. While buttoning her buttons, Torega grumbled. Not only did the girl have to live in exile, but the constant beatings were poisoning the beauty's life. But at that very moment, the blonde didn't want to think about it. After all, the beautiful dress was already lifting her spirits. She tried to pull herself together. She knew for sure that now was not the time to wallow in sadness. But something, at the instinctive level, was bothering the princess. And the approaching evening, illuminating the sky with terracotta colors, announced that a special event would soon take place in the girl's life. And the one who was supposed to take her to the ball was already standing at the door of Celeste's house. With his hands behind his back, as if trying to contain his excitement, Turkin was thinking. The door creaked open. Turning around, the young man looked in surprise at the rare beauty who had appeared in the doorway. She had already asked how long he had been waiting for her, and the emperor's servant, unable to look away, enjoyed the truly wonderful transformation. Without hiding his delight, the servant spoke frankly about how he had never seen such a beauty, and also about how clothes change a person, inviting him to lead the princess into the world of dance and music, good mood and luxurious outfits. Turkin was already extending his hand to her. Holding the young man by the arm, the princess was nervous, and he only continued to shower Celeste with compliments, filling her with confidence. Mixed feelings of anxiety and foreboding did not leave the girl. After all, she understood that the time had come to decide what to do with her life. The luxurious palace, ornately rising with its peaks into the night sky, emphasizes the wealth and vanity of its owner with amazing fireworks. The princess screamed. After all, she had long forgotten what the mansion looked like, but now it seemed completely different to the blonde. Not like in the days of her childhood. She couldn't get enough of it, because the palace loudly declared its power and showed ostentatious hospitality, lighting candles in every window. Even as a child, Selena was not allowed to enter it, because the aristocratic families were against it, and Turkin had already noted that the princess had a problem with expressing emotions. After all, members of the imperial family must express admiration very quietly, he added. Moreover, they had to keep their lips tightly compressed, the servant said, and not move them while talking and eating. But Celeste, frowning, thought only that she had not been taught this. Realizing how much the young man knew about etiquette, she felt subordinate to him, and the open patterned doors were already letting an unusual couple into the castle. The crowd turned around, and a quiet whisper rolled through the room. The princess, squeezing her shoulders, opened her eyes wide. After all, for the girl who had lived in seclusion for many years, now everything was new. But the aristocrats who were staring at them, already going beyond the etiquette that praised Turkin, looked at her with disdain. While discussing how real the princess was, they didn't even notice how they forgot about decency. Moreover, some didn't even recognize the girl. My head was spinning, and it was so difficult to breathe that it seemed like the next moment there wouldn't be enough air. However, the young man's voice, breaking through the princess's doubts and shame, told her to straighten her back. Moreover, the young man asked the princess to stop looking at him all the time. And what the young man said next shocked her. After all, she had to raise the corners of her lips and show a bearing that Celeste had never heard of. But raising her nose and straightening her back, the beauty already felt how the shoes began to rub her feet. However, the emperor's exit was already announced. Raph, sitting leisurely in his chair, looked at the guests, and the butler reported that Celeste had come to the ball. The luxurious white waistcoat, embroidered with gold threads, suited the blonde man amazingly, and the skillfully framed sapphire was the main decoration of the emperor's costume. Coming closer, the couple greeted Raph, but he was already carefully examining his sister's appearance. He was upset by the fact that the girl was so beautiful. He propped his cheek up with his fist, making it clear that he was bored, but nevertheless wanted Celeste to have a good time, and she, looking at her brother, already noted that he had already thought of something. After all, she had studied the sadist's facial expressions for many years. Only one thing remained a mystery. After all, the girl did not see Mr. Batiso. However, the cheerful laughter that rang out had already made her pay attention to the aperitif table, which was bursting with delicious desserts. But suddenly her gaze froze. After all, she was already being watched. Celeste felt it piercing her. Raising a glass of red wine to his lips, the Emperor looked at her with sad eyes. There was something appraising in his gaze, but not repulsive. Looking at him, Celeste tried to guess what reaction he was expecting. The beauty did not know how to talk to a man who at first glance seemed so calm. There was not a single idea in her head on how to lasso a man. However, there was a sharp, almost painful feeling that she had to act. And the next minute, a rustling sound behind her distracted the girl from her thoughts. And it was Turkin who was trying to say something in her ear. Listening, she already heard the servant advise the princess to propose to the Emperor. Not for love or the future, but for salvation. It was so humiliating and sad that Celeste was horrified. The princess felt like she would faint from shame. But the same advisor insisted that this was the only way to leave Calix and save his life. What was happening seemed like a dream to Celeste. After all, the beauty had been taught to hide, obey, and endure all her life. And now she had to act. And the Emperor's servant, not allowing the girl to retreat, insisted that it was time to make a winning move. The princess tried to understand how he knew that she wanted to leave this place. It seemed to her as if Turkin saw right through her. However, Celeste doubted that the Emperor would accept her proposal. After all, they were complete strangers. But the servant insistently said that the girl must make it so that the Emperor could not refuse her. But Turkin did not retreat. He only said that he would offer an option, but the princess had to do the rest. The narrow shoe was squeezing her foot so much that she couldn't stand it anymore. But suddenly it dawned on her why he had suddenly suggested that she do this. However, Turkin had already cut her off abruptly. Looking at the Emperor, the servant noted that Celeste was asking too many questions and was not trying to find answers. Concentrating, the blonde understood that it was time to act. And now the only thing that mattered was whether the girl could become the Empress of Kalinef. As she headed towards the Emperor, she thought about how satisfied the man would be with her proposal. And Mr. Batiso, still looking at the princess, calmly poured red wine into his glass. But Celeste, quickening her pace, was already thinking that he would hardly be able to refuse her. After all, what Batiso wanted, the Emperor of the most powerful country wanted. After all, the country of Black Wings Kalinef, which the girl knew about from the words of the maid, was a powerful state that was still expanding. And now, remembering Raf, who sat there with a dissatisfied face, it didn't look like it was he who invited Batiso. Now she understood that everything was completely the opposite. And that is why the imposed ball did not please her brother at all. And the princess was already approaching the table, generously served with sweets. The terribly nervous beauty tried to start a conversation. And Batiso, noticing this, hurried to invite the girl to the table. He understood that the girl wanted to tell him something. Otherwise, she would not have come up to him. Curtsying, Celeste thanked the Emperor for the invitation. But she already understood that he wanted the girl to sit opposite him, leaving the place next to him free. He apparently wanted to keep his distance. And the princess was already noting the young man's perfect appearance. Sitting down, the blonde thought about how to start the conversation. And her confused look was already attracting the Emperor. Seeing a new guest at the table, the service staff hurried to serve additional cutlery. Without wasting time, Mr. Batiso began the conversation. He asked about what question the beauty wanted to ask him. But the girl seemed not to hear the Emperor. It was hard for her to imagine how he would take what the blonde was about to offer him. After all, she didn't have the subtleties of the palace game. All she had was determination, and even that abandoned the princess. But after taking a deep breath, Celeste quickly proposed marriage to the Emperor. This proposal was unexpected, the Emperor noted. And the princess, who sensed the notes of sarcasm in his words, wanted to run away. Having closed his eyes and smiling, Batiso was already reproaching the girl. After all, first the beauty asked him why he had come, and then she proposed marriage. But the princess, with her eyes downcast and not knowing where to hide from shame, looked at the empty plate, while the Emperor noted her amazing appearance. Having grown a little bolder, she was already reminding him that if he married her, he would get this country. It was a bold statement, Batiso noted, his eyes flashing angrily. And then, looking menacingly at her point blank, he already claimed that now Princess Calix was offering his country to him. The man smiled as he brought the glass to his mouth. The warrior found it funny to hear the princess's proposal, who moreover had long since been excommunicated from the court. But then he suddenly laughed loudly. After all, the glory of the emperor preceded his greatness. However, the princess did not give in. Having gathered her courage, she already asked the emperor whether he really wanted to give up Calyx. But the man, continuing to twirl the glass in his hand, was already saying that the girl did not understand who he was. It seemed that Celeste had lifted his spirits. For the next moment he was already saying that he could get Calyx even without marrying her. After all it took was a talk with his emperor. But the princess didn't think Ralph would give up his country. Well, maybe just some unnecessary piece of it. And she was already in a hurry to voice her thought. After all, the blonde understood that Belizo most likely had other intentions, which meant there would be war and casualties. And even if he wins the war, the girl continued, looking at the expression on the emperor's face, the losses will still be significant. But suddenly her gaze changed. After all, Celeste, smiling, had already offered to help the emperor get Calyx without any losses for Kalinef. In her heart, she was proud of herself. After all, she thought that she had already made a worthy proposal to the man, quite selflessly. Pouring another glass of wine, Batiso smirked. After all, he believed that people like the princess did not particularly value his country. However, the girl, lowering her eyes again, reminded him that he knew her situation. And these were not rumors that her brother was constantly bullying her. Looking tenderly at Emperor Batiso, she assumed that, having entered his country as empress, she would be able to love it as he did. Knowing that she didn't know how to drink at all, she slowly brought the glass to her mouth. The girl liked the smell of the drink. She even tried to understand what it was made of. It seemed that the emperor had taken a pause. After all, the princess already felt his detachment, and Celeste didn't like it. And although she understood little about negotiations, she already saw that the emperor had a talent for putting people in awkward positions. A minute later, the blonde was talking about how Celeste wouldn't help him get Calyx, but she only quietly retorted that she would help if the man let her. Changing the subject of the conversation, the emperor already said that he saw that she was claiming to become the empress of Kalinef. But the girl was too young, he noted, and the busy emperor had absolutely no time to teach her, and there was a lot to learn. However, the stubborn princess was already ready for anything. He abruptly put the glass down on the table, doubting, especially since his demands were quite specific. Squinting his eyes, the emperor was already saying that Celeste didn't even know what she would have to learn, and the serious-minded girl, realizing that the option she proposed only made him laugh. But she dreamed of only one thing, that Batizo would agree. Snorting and chuckling, the blonde thought. He liked her confidence, and now he was thinking about how he hadn't even noticed this quality in her at first glance. But raising his glass, he insisted that Celeste keep the promise she made at this table. The princess smiled. She may have looked a little silly at that moment, but inside she was jubilant, because she felt that she had succeeded. The ringing of glasses, a high note, swept through the hall, sealing the blonde's promise. Celeste rejoiced, assuring that she would be able to keep her word, and the emperor's servant, who was behind the curtain, already heard her joyful laughter and the emperor's soft voice. Looking at the princess, he rejoiced. After all, he already understood that everything was going according to a clearly thought-out plan, the author of which was he. Despite the late hour, the sky above the castle was blazing with hundreds of lights. Fireworks scratching the night were scattered like jewels on black velvet. Catching her breath, the blonde slowly walked through the castle courtyard. She was glad that everything worked out, afraid to even think about how it could have been different. But the next moment, a piercing pain stopped Celeste. The princess was so worried that she didn't even notice how badly she had rubbed her feet. I didn't understand how this happened. Because she walked so little during the ball, the girl approached the bench near the fountain, and now she wanted to take a closer look at what had happened to her leg. Lifting her dress, the princess sighed heavily. It seemed that the girl, accustomed to pain, should not have paid attention to such trifles at all. But when she took off her shoe, the blonde could already see that her entire foot was on fire. This upset the girl, because she didn't understand how she would get home now. However, the next moment the man's shadow was already covering her wounded limb. The emperor's servant, who appeared as if from under the ground, already made the princess shudder. I don't understand how she didn't notice him. The girl asked him not to do that again, and the young man, smiling, was already saying that he had tried to talk to her, but Celeste was so carried away that she did not hear him. Turkin saw that the girl had a problem with her shoes, but the princess asked him not to pay attention to such a trifle. However, raising her head, she already wanted to ask something of the emperor's servant. The young man was not against trying to win Celeste over. The girl felt that he was more than a servant to his master. And now Celeste assumed that most likely Mr. Batiso knew that the girl would propose marriage to him. Turkin did not deny it, but he hardly knew the young man noted that she would propose to him calyx. Was it really only this proposal that decided her fate? Celeste wondered. But the young man, being in a great mood, was already saying that this was most likely the case. The princess closed her eyes and sighed. After all, it was perfectly understandable that Batiso was checking her. After all, the matter was so urgent that there were no other options, and now all the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. After all, the reason why Mr. Batiso came here and even the upcoming wedding were most likely Turkin's plan. The young man, smiling broadly, said only that he only partially took part in this event. But when she thought about it, she already understood that when Turkin proposed marriage, he knew that Celeste would want to give up calyx as well. She suddenly felt so sick at the thought that the young man could see right through her. Even more, she was like a pawn on a chessboard. Holding his leg, she asked the young man to move away from her, citing fatigue. Although she had long noticed that she got tired when he was nearby, he glanced at the emperor's servant for a second. She was already reminding him that he also needed to rest. But he wasn't tired at all, Turkin thought. The princess sought the strength within herself to get up and walk home, but her leg ached terribly. Suddenly, Turkin leaned over and extended his hand towards her leg. The girl shuddered in surprise. Celeste demanded that the man take his hands off. However, he was already apologizing, because he knew that it was her first time wearing shoes, but he did not think that she would hurt her feet so much. However, the princess was already simply screaming that she felt great and asked to be left alone. Having shown his character, he calmly told her not to twitch. After all, Turkin intended to accompany her and treat her as befits a princess. "Do all members of the imperial family have to have escorts?" the princess asked snappingly. She pretended that she was worried about the moment that they would be seen together. But continuing to smile, the young man was already saying that he did not see anyone. The princess lowered her eyes and thought that this guy was just her subordinate, and therefore she could do whatever she wanted with him. But something stopped the girl. After all, he tried to do everything to make the beauty feel better, and she already felt it after the massage. But the voices that were heard had already refuted Turkin's spontaneous statement that no one came here. The tender beauty, clinging to her admirer, praised him for finding a wonderful place, and the observers sitting behind the fountain did not know what to do. Without thinking twice, Turkin was already pointing his finger at a tree growing in the park. After all, it was the only place they could hide behind. Stealthily making their way through the thickets of bushes, the strange couple tried not to give themselves away. However, from the side they could observe the couple in love. And now the girl, clinging to the young man, was worried that they could be seen. But the partner was already calming the beauty, telling Turkin, as he had told her earlier, that there were no people here. In a fit of passion, he was already hugging her, stroking her intimate places and unbuttoning her dress on the back. Covering her mouth with her hands, the princess did not understand how to behave. She had never seen anything like this, and she vaguely understood what would follow. Turning away from the terrible picture, she puffed out her cheeks in fear, refusing to believe what was happening. It was unclear why, but she felt ashamed. And now she dreamed only of getting out as quickly as possible and not listening to these sounds. Noticing the princess's embarrassment, Turkin was already gently but firmly covering the girl's ears, realizing how pure and innocent she was. And Celeste, pressed against the tree trunk, looked into the young man's eyes with great gratitude. Turkin's touch excited her, but she didn't want such care from a man, and he only wanted to spare her from such sounds. Looking towards the couple in love, he understood that the young people were going further and further in their impulses, satisfying mutual desires. And now he was telling Celeste, who was extremely confused and clenched her fists tightly on her chest, that the young people had not yet left. Turkin was so close to her that the girl could feel his breath. Now the princess understood why Turkin always scared her. After all, he always looked at her point blank, although the girl understood that he had no feelings for her. However, Celeste had already noted his pleasant appearance, as well as the completely unusual color of his eyes. After all, it was the first time in my life that I saw such red eyes up close. It was very beautiful, although sometimes frightening. But the next moment the princess forbade thinking about him. After all, she knew about Turkin's ability to read minds. Well, no matter how she tried to do it, it still returned to her blonde head. And the heart, which the girl could now clearly hear, was beating as if she was running somewhere. But the young man, having finally opened the princess's ears, was already saying that the couple had left. Looking into the princess's eyes, he did not understand whether she heard him or not, and the girl, as if deaf, looked at the guy attentively. But lowering her eyes, she already accepted the fact that taking care of her was his responsibility. Having risen, the princess was already hurrying to return to the castle. And Turkin, looking at the sad look of the beauty, already understood how much it hurt her to walk. However, he did not know how often the girl moved despite the pain. And now, taking her hands in herself again, Celeste said that she wanted to walk on the contrary. Never ceasing to be amazed by the strength and resilience of the young woman, the emperor's servant did not take his eyes off her. She bent down and tried to shake off the hem of her dress. But the brunette, getting ahead of the girl, was already reminding her that this was also part of his duties. I held out my hand and he advised me to hurry, because they could be noticed in the palace. Now Celeste didn't know at all if she could trust him. There was no lie in him. But she didn't feel the truth either. But he was the only person who was next to her. And so, without thinking, she extended her hand to the young man. Moving through the huge garden, Turkin promised the princess to talk about the wedding when the ball was over. And she, realizing that everything was happening very quickly, only sighed quietly. Just a few minutes later, sitting over a cup of tea, Emperor Batiso suggested that the wedding be held as quickly as possible. Looking at the couple sitting opposite him, he noted that this was the first union of Kalinef and Calix, and therefore he did not want to slow things down. But Raf, representing the princess, was already nervous. And the girl, despite knowing about this conversation, looked confused. Batizo noted that Celeste's brother was clearly not happy about this news, and he only said that he was very surprised. He closed his eyes and hurried to say that he wanted to spend everything in Kalinef. The imperial family would send congratulations, but would not participate themselves. However, the smiling blonde was surprised by such a decision. But realizing that the wedding was just a pretext, he was ready to accept such conditions. Looking at the princess, Raf noted that he would also like to hold this event on a grand scale. However, he could not do this, said the sadist, looking sympathetically at his sister. Putting his hand on her and pretending to be genuinely sorry, Emperor Kalines reminded her that he could do nothing about the princess's low origins. However, Batizo has already said that this does not bother him at all. After all, the girl is beautiful as spring, and that is quite enough. And Raf was already covered in red spots. Trying to catch his breath and come up with something new, he was already calling the servants. He asked to replace the tea, noting that the drink poured into the cups had completely cooled down. After all, this tea is supplied only to the imperial family from Karsa, which is to the east of the sea, the blonde noted. When Batiso suggested trying the drink, he emphasized that it was only supplied to the empire of Calix. However, the emperor, ignoring his opponent's boasting, only continued to carefully examine Celeste. Noticing this, Raf was already asking how much the guest liked the drink, and the seated blonde, trying tea for the first time, only felt a simple, herbal taste. However, Batiso reminded the emperor that he would not try the drink according to special principles. Pushing the cup away, he did not hide the fact that he only eats and drinks what is prepared at his home. Blushing, he admitted that he always tries to be vigilant, and over many years he has developed this rule. However, Raf, who looked at him, already noted that this was a wise decision, and the princess already saw that her brother was being cautious in front of the blonde. Of course, this was a forced marriage, the girl thought, but for her it was the right path. Returning home, she took out her suitcase. While packing her modest belongings, Celeste couldn't get over the joy of going to Kalinef the very next day, and now she asked the maid if she would go with her. The woman was not against it, because she could not let the princess go to an unfamiliar place without an escort. She loved the princess so much that she had already said that even if Celeste were to die, she would die next to her. And she hurried to thank the servants. Hugging the woman tightly, the beauty thought that if it weren't for her, the princess would have gone crazy in this basement long ago. However, the joy did not last long, because the next moment the door suddenly opened. Celeste shuddered. Her brother, standing on the threshold, was speaking in a familiar tone about how glad he was to death that his sister was leaving. He was almost growling, and the beauty saw that Raf was very drunk. He was wondering how his illegitimate sister managed to persuade the emperor to marry her. Looking at the flushed man, Celeste made excuses. She assumed that perhaps the man simply liked her, but he, already waving his arms, was telling that very beautiful women lived in Kalinef, and so he did not understand how someone like her, how she could be liked. Although what did he expect from the princess after all? Her mother was exactly the same, Raf added. And she not only deceived the emperor, but also had affairs with everyone in sight. And now the emperor even doubted that she was a princess. But the girl asked to stop this terrible conversation. However, a minute later she already regretted that she had made a remark to Raf. She asked him to return to the castle, and he, insulting and humiliating the girl, claimed that the aristocrats in Kalinef would hardly accept her. However, the woman clenching her fists boldly said that she did not care whether she became empress. And suddenly, having become completely bold, the princess was already shouting about how it was important for her now to leave this hell, and also to forget the one she hated so much. He didn't even doubt that the girl was thinking about it, and without holding back he attacked the princess with his fists. Celeste crouched down and covered herself with her hands, and Raf kept hitting her. But at some point she suddenly realized that the man had stopped beating her. But the next moment he was already attacking Terega. The maid fell, and Celeste covered her eyes with her hands in fear. Well, the aggressive emperor went completely wild and didn't understand what right a commoner had to stop him. He kicked the woman in the head and shouted that no one dared stop him, and the stupid princess deserved to be killed by him. The maid moaned, and the brave Celeste, covering the girl, begged the emperor to stop. But he, having entered into a frenzy, no longer hurt anyone, only by delivering blow after blow, but this time on the back of the princess covering Terega, did he receive pleasure. But the maid lying underneath her was already asking the blonde to get off her. She was asking Raf for forgiveness and was talking about him beating her. Blood was oozing from the princess's unhealed wounds. It was unknown how this story would have ended, but two people were already entering the girl's house, which Raf had not expected at all, and they were amazed by what they saw. Now they understood with their own eyes the process of raising a princess. The disheveled Raf, knowing that he had found himself in a rather awkward situation, changed his anger to mercy. He also asked Batizo how he had ended up in this house, and the emperor, looking at the terrible picture, did not understand whether he needed to see all this. After all, Celeste, lifting the maid from the floor, was sobbing. She already dreamed that the beatings would never be repeated, but not even 2 days had passed. But the moral monster only laughed, speaking about the small skirmish he had with his sister. He regretted that the men had to see it. However, he again asked the emperor why he had come here at such a time. Batizo did not hide that he had come to talk to his bride. Sadness flashed through Raf's eyes. After all, he had been so upset, the young man added when he learned that his sister was leaving. Without stopping, she continued to play the comedy, saying that emotions simply overwhelmed him. At this moment, the princess looked at her brother with disapproval. After all, he had to teach a lesson to the servant who had spoiled the emperor's mood, Raf added. Turkin looked at his master with horror, while the man continued to play the jester without stopping. But Emperor Kalinefa noted that such behavior was not appropriate for a man of his level, recalling that the princess's brother was always distinguished by his long excuses. Looking at the girl and raising his hand, Batizo said that perhaps everything was as he said. But everything looked completely different. After all, the imperial family in Calix, which was so proud of its dignity, always punished its subordinates. He asked to be left alone with Celeste if Raf was already finished with the massacre. After all, he needed to talk to his bride. The emperor did not like being told what to do. However, now, clenching his fists, the emperor was not against leaving them for a conversation. Wishing the bloody princess sweet dreams, the sadist left her haven. Moving abruptly and chaotically, he simply ran past Emperor Kalinev, but lifting the maid and looking after her brother. Celeste already doubted how drunk he was. After all, he very quickly submitted to Batizo. Holding the beaten servant, the blonde thanked the emperor for intervening. And now Celeste asked what the man wanted to talk to her about. But Batizo calmly reported that tomorrow they would be leaving for Kalinev. He did not hide that the road ahead was long. And even if he traveled without rest, the emperor continued, it would take about 15 days. However, pointing to Turkin, he said that thanks to him they would spend from a week to 10 days on the road. Celeste, who looked back at that moment, did not quite understand what role the emperor's servant could play in time. And it will be necessary to go, even if the princess falls ill, the emperor added. The disheveled and beaten beauty agreed, realizing that he was not consulting her, but presenting her with a fait accompli. But she did not yet know whether she could hold out for 10 days. However, the emperor was already in a hurry to leave the uncomfortable room, considering the conversation over. Nodding towards Turkin, he said goodbye. The men disappeared so quickly that the girls only had time to bow. But now one of them thought that she was ready to do anything for freedom. But as soon as the door closed, Celeste could not shake the feeling that Mr. Batiso was looking at her with pity. However, even if this was the case, the beauty recalled, there was nothing she could do about it yet. The morning slowly descended on the mortal earth. The air was so clear that it seemed as if nature itself, holding its breath, wanted to say goodbye to Celeste. Turkin, who had come for the princess, had already said that the carriage was ready, and the maid was already hurrying to carry things into it. The princess, dressed in a yellow travel suit, holding a suitcase in front of her, was already in a hurry to say that there weren't many things, so Terega would manage quickly. Taking the suitcase from the girl, Turkin accidentally pinched her finger. The princess, screaming in surprise, blushed, but quickly coming to her senses, she thanked the servant. However, he again reminded the blonde that members of the royal family should not thank servants. Turkin quickly glanced at the princess and said that for them this was work. The girl was grateful to him, because no one had ever taught her etiquette, but he saw that in addition to the suitcase in her hands, the princess was holding a small travel bag. Quickly snatching that one from the girl's hands, the emperor's servant reminded her that this was also his job. Forgetting the brunette's instructions, Celeste hurried to thank him again. But looking at Turkin, she already noticed his menacing gaze and disappointed look. The man reminded her again that she shouldn't admire out loud. This also applied to gratitude. The princess blushed, and now she remembered that before leaving Calix she had met with her brother and the aristocracy. Raf, opening his arms wide, lamented that she was leaving. She felt the falseness that emanated from the members of the royal family. But most of all, she remembered Raf's strange words of farewell. After all, he, leaning very close to his sister, asked her to save herself. It was disgusting for her to hear such words. After all, the Inspirator had been mocking her for several years. And then, but very quietly, approaching her ear, he spoke about how she must survive in Kalinefi. Seeing the princess's frightened look, the moral freak smiled, and the thoughtful Selena did not understand why such warnings. But pulling herself together and raising her eyes, she looked at his brother with hatred. She promised him that she would definitely survive, and when she returned to Calix, she would definitely deal with her mother's death. The luxurious palace, the existence of which she had forgotten before meeting Batiso, was already seeing off its illegitimate heiress. However, leaving him, she mentally asked Raf to wait for her, since it was to him that she had the most questions. It was the 12th day since the princess had left Calix. The imperial carriage moved slowly through the forest. Looking through the window, the guard was already suggesting that the princess take a rest and then move on. Having set the table, the maid asked Celeste to eat. After all, she needed strength, and the pie, asparagus, and a piece of cheese were more than welcome. Caring Terega was worried that the princess had a hard time riding in a carriage because of the wounds on her back, but the girl reminded her that she had taken her medicine. But suddenly a familiar voice said that Celeste was healthier than he thought. Raising her eyes, the girl already saw Mr. Batizo. With his arms folded across his chest, the emperor worried about Celeste's health and asked if the medications were helping. Being pleased with the appearance of her future husband, after several days of travel, she already answered with a smile that she was very persistent. Looking at the forest surrounding them, Batiso was already reporting that in 3 more days they would safely reach Kalinef. Extending his hand, he added that, as he had said earlier, Turkin would take care of everything from now on. After all, he completely forgot to tell her that he was a wizard of space and time. And also, the man added with a sigh that if there had been fewer escorts, they would have long ago been transported to Kalinef directly from Calix. Holding the dishes in her hands, the princess did not understand what he was talking about. After all, she believed that wizards did not exist in this world. But sighing, Mr. Batiso informed the girl that it would be difficult for him to explain this. After all, the servant told him that she had not even received a basic education. Smiling, he repeated again that the girl would indeed have to learn a lot. However, Selena did not know what to answer. Lowering her head, the princess promised that she would try, and her future husband was already leaving. She was sad, and even a little hurt, but she understood that getting closer to him would not be easy. After all, the girl, like last time, thought that he was some kind of heartless, and now, looking at the back of the retreating emperor, she was visited by various thoughts. But one thing was absolutely clear, because they were as different as heaven and earth. It seemed that the long journey would never end. Carriages and carts, slowly moving through forests and fields, carried tired companions. Terega was sleeping, and the princess, exhausted by pain, lost track of time. After all her ointments and painkillers had long since run out, and her strength was leaving her. But suddenly the driver stopped the horses. The sounds died down, and people's conversations began to fill the space. The princess, looking out the window, saw that the journey was not yet over. So why there was a stop, she did not yet understand. However, she had already heard a familiar voice, which said that from here they would travel through space and time. But the people surrounding the wizard, seeing how he activated the fireball, were already asking him if he would really do it here. The awakened maid began to cry, and the princess, clinging to the carriage window, was already asking her to calm down, because now they would witness a miracle. And Terega hurried to report that she was seeing a wizard for the first time in her life. After all, keeping a magician, the servants assumed, was probably a very expensive pleasure. But suddenly everything around started spinning. The magic ball, spinning energy, pulled people, horses, and carts into its huge funnel. The princess, closing her eyes, already felt a strong headache, but it did not last long. After all, in just a minute the flow of energy, like a wild river, breaking through the border, was already throwing objects and people into the courtyard of the imperial castle. The space flared with light and the air hummed with tension. Reality shook. Opening her eyes, Celeste could not believe what was happening. She couldn't even imagine living in her miserable little house, that such miracles exist in the world. The girl thought in delight. And now, looking at the majestic palace of Kalinef, she already understood that it was so large that it inspired more fear than she had imagined. And Turkin was already looking in the carriage window, and the smiling princess was glad to see him, because she had not even imagined that he had such a talent. Opening the carriage door, the emperor's servant said that they had arrived, and he was glad that the princess was okay. And now he invited the girl to go to Mr. Batiso. After all, the assembled nobility already wanted to see Princess Celeste. The beauty was scared. She felt that the gazes riveted on the future empress would be strict, and the story of her origin did not give the blonde any peace. But there was nothing to be done, because she herself had offered herself for this role. She saw how her hands were shaking, and she understood that she was more nervous than at the ball. However, Turkin, seeing the girl's condition, asked her to calm down, and there was genuine concern in his voice. Holding out his hand to the princess, he could already feel the trembling in her small palm. Turkin asked the girl to think about how she was shaking from the weather. Once again, Celeste was grateful to him. After all, she understood that she would hardly have coped with all the events if not for his care. Putting her hand into Turkin's, she felt how hot it was, and he, remembering her brother, reminded her that no one would hurt her here. The princess was faceless. Again encouraging the princess, he asked her to behave as befits a member of the imperial family, decisively and boldly. And after some time, Turkin pompously announced to the curious nobility that he was glad to introduce them to the future empress of Kalinef. After all, the emperor's chosen one was Princess Celeste, born in Calix. The blonde was slightly nervous but tried to cheer herself up internally. And now the princess, looking at her subjects and the huge palace, tried to believe that all this was reality and not an illusion. Realizing how tired the girl was on the way, Batiso already asked the maid to show the room in which the princess would live until the wedding. What she saw amazed the beauty. Now it seemed to the blonde that she had died and gone to heaven. After all, the pearl garlands hanging from the carved headboard of the bed quietly rang out like the music of dreams. Without ceasing to admire the room, she already remembered Turkin's words that after the wedding she would settle in the marital chambers. However, the maid had already announced that the bathing water was ready, and the princess had no choice but to follow her. And the girl had already reminded her that the emperor was waiting for her for dinner after bathing. Of course she would like to rest, but she was in no position to refuse. Having undressed, the girl sat down in the bath. However, out of the corner of her eye she watched as the excited maids were horrified by what they saw. The princess's back was mutilated. Horrible scars, blue and red, covering her tender body, remained as a memory of recent events. Feeling that the maids were confused, she remained silent. After all, their faces reflected questions that could not be hidden. Feeling that it was time to lighten the mood, Celeste asked to pass her a washcloth, and one of the maids was already talking about applying ointment to the girl's back. Clutching the washcloth to herself, she caught herself thinking that she wanted to thank the servant again. Washing her hands, she thought about Batiso. After all, she had long wanted to talk to him alone. Having relaxed, the girl wanted to rest, but the emperor was waiting for her. And after some time, Celeste was sitting at a huge black table. The luxurious blue dress surprisingly matched her blue eyes. Falling asleep from fatigue, the girl did not understand why the emperor was late. After all, she had been waiting for him for a long time. The wait seemed like an eternity, and only the old wooden clock striking every minute reminded that time exists. But suddenly the heavy doors covered with golden monograms opened slightly. In the stream of light, the princess tried to see the person entering. Despite her fatigue, she looked surprisingly fresh. But now Celeste was thinking only about meeting Batiso. However, it was not destined to happen. After all, the princess had already seen Turkin, who only looked at her with confusion. The princess did not understand why he invited her if he himself did not intend to come. But Tarkin, anticipating the beauty's questions, had already asked for forgiveness on behalf of his master. After all, he had urgent business. However, Turkin could not allow the princess to have her first dinner in Kalinef alone, and so he decided to join her. But narrowing her eyes and blushing, Celeste only quietly reported that she would even be better off alone. And a minute later there was already a huge piece of pie, cheese, and asparagus on her plate. The blonde was clearly surprised by such a huge portion, but Turkin had already told the girl to moderate her admiration. After all, he thought that she was quite hungry and asked her to eat quickly. Taking the cutlery in her hands, Celeste looked at the plate in confusion. After all, banal skills were turning into humiliation. The blonde blushed, and the young man, realizing that she was upset again, was already asking how he could help the girl. Juggling objects in her hands, Celeste smiled stupidly. But she didn't want to lie. That's why she already asked Turkin to help her, and he happily hurried to help. Taking the cutlery in his hands, Turkin was already demonstrating simple skills to the princess. Trying to repeat after him, Celeste already understood that it was far from as easy as it looked. After all, he did it so gracefully that it took her breath away. Approaching the princess, he understood that he had to show the girl how to use the objects in practice. Tarkin took the cutlery in his hands and cut the food served to him with such grace, like an artist applying brushstrokes to a canvas. Celeste couldn't tear her eyes away. She just stared at this simple action, fascinated. After all, it seemed like real art. Pressing himself against the princess from behind and holding her hands, he tried to pass on his knowledge. But from such a touch, the princess completely stopped breathing. However, the man, not noticing her condition, continued to teach the princess. Encouraging the girl, he said that she would very soon do everything better than he did. It was obvious that Tarkin was perplexed. After all, he did not understand at all how the princess had never used a knife and fork. However, Celeste quickly explained that she had only used a spoon. The girl rarely ate meat, and now the brunette understood only one thing. She was fed from the servant's table. A single tear rolled down her face. After all, the blonde couldn't even remember if she had ever eaten fruit in her life. The emotions that overwhelmed Tarkin were indescribable. He did not understand how it was possible to mock a member of the imperial family, and a girl at that. Without mincing words, he already called things by their proper names. After all, Celeste's brother really was a rare bastard. Hearing such words from Tarkin, the princess shuddered. After all, for a moment she thought that she had thought about him like that more than once. Turning around, Celeste saw the young man's face darken. It seemed as if he was ready to burst with anger. However, noticing the girl's gaze, the emperor's servant quickly came to his senses. But he continued to pretend that he did not understand why the princess was looking at him like that, and he was already in a hurry to ask her about it. However, the blonde answered that she was just thinking. Changing the topic of conversation, he thought that he had spoiled her mood. However, the princess was already laughing. After all, she had never heard anyone scold the count. While stabbing pieces of fruit, Celeste listened as Tarkin talked about how if you insult someone, you yourself will eventually be insulted. In high spirits, the princess suggested that the young man begin his meal quickly. After all, everything smelled so fragrant. Watching the beauty, he saw how she tried to quickly use cutlery, but her little hands were shaking. He didn't want Celeste to get nervous and therefore offered to go out while she ate. However, the beauty asked to stay and not leave. Having bowed to the princess, he said that he had to go, and only his reddened skin said that everything was not so simple. Realizing that she didn't dare detain him, the girl was already letting him go. After all, her brain was now thinking only about food, and he didn't care at all. As Celeste watched the man leave, she thought that for a man who had just insulted another, the wizard had excellent manners. However, the cutlery, or rather its presence, did not give the princess any peace. but driven by hunger, she understood that now they had no place in her life. Throwing them aside, she grabbed a piece of pie with her hands. Tearing it into pieces, the girl enjoyed herself, promising to return to etiquette when she was full. Like a savage, she greedily devoured food, forgetting about everything in the world. After all, the animal instinct, drowning out reason, displaced shame and dignity, trying to survive. But suddenly the girl stopped. Bitter tears flowed down her beautiful and at the same time dirty face. It was so delicious, as if she had never seen food before. As Celeste continued to eat her dinner, she was already remembering her mother. I wonder if she had tried such food in Calyx or not, the princess thought. After a while, tea was served, and Turkin joined the girl again, which made her incredibly happy. Looking at the beauty, he said that she shouldn't talk to all her subordinates the way she did to Terega. But looking angrily at the young man, the princess did not understand how she should behave. And she also felt sick, because she had never eaten so much. However, Turkin was in a hurry to teach her etiquette as soon as possible. And now he was talking about how she was forbidden to communicate closely with her subordinates. The princess was only supposed to give short and serious orders, and always walk with her head up. Celeste didn't think it could be that complicated. Having only said that she would try, the girl was already running out of the room. Not understanding what was happening, the emperor's servant rose from his chair. The princess turned green. Nausea, creeping up from within, rose in a heavy wave to her throat. The princess was rushing around the room, and the confused wizard did not take his eyes off her. Running into it, she leaned over the sink. The beauty was throwing up, and the food was to blame, or rather the amount of it. My head was spinning, making it impossible to leave the restroom. Not understanding what was happening, Turkin was already opening the door to the toilet room. But Celeste, turning around abruptly, asked the young man not to enter. After all, she felt so bad that she was afraid of losing consciousness. However, the next moment she was already sliding down the wall, and the frightened Turkin, rushing to help, was already catching the girl. His hands, warm and strong, held the drooping body tightly. Looking at the girl, he did not understand what to do. But the next moment, opening her eyes, she was already languidly addressing him. But the young man, reading the spell, was already trying to help the princess. Looking at him, Celeste could not make out the words, because she did not speak such a language. Warm, sunny rays, breaking through the huge windows, looked with curiosity at the beautiful guest, and she, opening her eyes, did not quite understand where she was. But soon the events of the evening were already completely waking her up. Lying in her huge bed with her hair scattered across the pillow, Celeste tried to remember the details of the evening. But so far all she could remember was that she had fainted. Sitting up in bed, the princess realized that it was morning, and that meant that the blonde had been lying in bed all day. Without thinking, she quickly rang the bell. Cutting through the silence, it hurried to call the servants. The girl who entered bowed. She was ready to fulfill any wish of the princess. However, Celeste asked only for water. But suddenly she asked whether Mr. Batizo had breakfast. However, the servants reminded that the emperor had breakfast early. Moreover, he had already left long ago. The princess lowered her head and sighed, because she dreamed of having breakfast together. But the maid was already interested in what the beauty would like for breakfast. Remembering the evening, she only asked for some light snack, promising that as soon as breakfast was ready, she would immediately bring it to the bedroom. The girl left, and a few minutes later she was already bringing into the room a tray with soup, a fragrant omelet, poured with sauce and garnished with a basil leaf, as well as bread. Holding the cutlery in her hand, Celeste was in indescribable delight. But she was already in a hurry to ask what would happen to the food if the girl didn't finish eating something. Pouring aromatic tea, the maid calmly replied that what was left after the master's meals, they would eat themselves. Thinking quickly, the princess was already saying that the girl could take everything except the bread and soup. After all, she didn't want last night to repeat itself. However, the maid reminded that this was not allowed. After all, in this case, the kitchen would be reprimanded for the tasteless food. But the beauty, really feeling unwell, asked to think of something. However, soon tea was served. Looking at the beautiful brown surface of the drink, the princess for some reason remembered the tea party in Colleen's. And Turkin, who had joined, was already interested in how much better the princess was feeling. She had almost recovered, and she thanked him for his concern. Enjoying the drink, Celeste realized that it was the same tea that Raf had once offered them. However, the taste was completely different, the girl said. The emperor's servant agreed with the princess. It's just that the taste and smell of the drink always depended on who made it. And taking hold of the elegant teapot, He already offered to make it for the princess. Turkin boasted that in Kalinef they make this tea better than at Mr. Raff's. It was an honor for her to have such a great wizard make tea for her. And now he noted that the Khalids knew everything and even more about this drink. Celeste had already noticed that he looked very gallant today, and the luxurious pendant tie perfectly matched his blue waistcoat. But suddenly, raising her finger, the princess said that she knew about these people. After all, they inherited the blood of the fairies when their state was destroyed 100 years ago. Turkin was surprised because he did not expect such knowledge from the princess, and he also praised the girl for her excellent memory. But the next moment, she opened her eyes wide and was already asking the young man if the blood of the Khalids really flowed in his veins. The brunette liked her sly remark. After all, in this way the beauty practically declared that the Khalid was subordinate to the emperor. However, everything was a little different. After all, 5 years ago, Turkin began, he saved Mr. Batizo when he was at war. The princess was surprised, and the brunette, admiring his reflection on the surface of the tea, already admitted that he had come for a reason. Looking sideways at the young man, the princess asked him to quickly tell her what was going on, realizing that it concerned her. The young man didn't want to hide anything. He said that the aristocracy had risen against the wedding of Celeste and Mr. Batizo. Celeste froze. Her plans for a wonderful future were collapsing like a house of cards. She already understood that she would have to forget about marriage for an indefinite period of time. The princess lowered her eyes and blushed. Of course, she assumed that her origin could play a significant role in this story. However, Turkin was quick to say that everything takes time, and she only quietly replied that everything was fine, understood them, and did not even think of putting forward any conditions. But the next minute she was already remembering how the nobles of Calix were constantly gossiping about how Raff could not strengthen his position because of his sister. However, Celeste wanted to believe that everything would be different in Caliph. But apparently she would still have to fight for her place in the sun, the princess thought. Noticing how the girl tensed up, Tarkin was already worried about her condition. After all, the blonde suddenly fell silent, and she, tightly clutching the cup, did not understand at all what to answer. After all, everyone had long known that she was not a princess, but a fake. However, Turkin asked the girl to calm down. He understood that the wedding dates would change, but his master always kept his word. Celeste became sad. Realizing the hopelessness, she thought only that she had no choice but to accept it. But an unexpectedly enlightening thought was already adding a sparkle to her eyes. Something inside the beauty clicked, forcing her to ask a question, and now she wanted to discuss the moment when she fainted. After all, the princess tried in vain to remember what Turkin had said to her then, and the young man, feeling a stream of heat spreading through his ears, suddenly sighed heavily. He didn't want to return to these memories. After all, they, by exposing his feelings, made him feel like the same person as everyone around him. After all, it seemed to him then that the girl who was in his arms was already dead. But suddenly, opening her eyes, she was already addressing him by name. The brunette understood that he had to do something. Reading the spells, he called upon the higher powers to breathe life into the princess. After all, he understood that he could not so easily part with the one who did not leave his head. But continuing to drink tea as if nothing had happened, he only said that he had simply called her. However, Celeste thought differently, and the evening that had descended, illuminating the castle towers, called upon the heavenly bodies to line up for a night parade. She waited for this meeting for 2 long days, and even the huge table that separated them did not prevent the girl from admiring the emperor. It was noticeable that she was now more confident with cutlery, and Celeste's dress only indicated that her future husband had excellent taste. Looking at the emperor, she felt a certain awkwardness, because she knew absolutely nothing about this man. The princess knew that he should start the conversation first, but suddenly a short word was already flying across the huge table. Trying to understand what he was asking about, the princess turned into an ear, pouring wine into a glass and glancing sideways at the blonde. Batiso was already in a hurry to remind her that the girl had promised to learn everything quickly. It seemed like a casual question, but suddenly the man wondered how capable a student the princess could be. Assessing the aroma of the wine, he did not hide that the aristocratic part of society was against her, and they set conditions. The nobility believed, Batizo continued, that the future empress should receive an education worthy of her position. The blonde was surprised. After all, she believed that no one could tell the emperor what to do. However, as she continued eating, She was already thinking about what question to ask the man. Raising her head, the princess was already asking about what education should include. It was history, geography, economics, and etiquette, Batiso specified. But there was something else that Batiso still couldn't bring himself to say. Looking at the beauty, he was still thinking whether to talk about it or not. However, closing his eyes, he decided that Celeste was clearly not yet ready to discuss such a delicate but important topic. Trying to catch every word, Celeste fell silent. However, the girl, completely unaware of what he was hinting at, believed that this was not the most important thing on the list. The blonde was ready to start training immediately. After all, if the wedding day depended on it, the girl was ready to keep her promise. And the emperor confirmed that from tomorrow onwards, teachers in various disciplines would come to her. Having thanked the man, the princess thought about it. After all, she had to go a long way into the world of knowledge, and now the beauty was a little scared. Batiso, continuing to enjoy the aroma of the wine, seemed to have forgotten about her existence for a while. The silence that hung there was oppressive, and only the candles crackled merrily in the candelabra. As she continued to enjoy her food, the princess thought that she had not felt so awkward with Turkin. But after a while, carefully placing the glass on the table, the man noted that she had not eaten anything, and the princess, quickly looking at Batiso, already said that he was quite attentive. But in the evening she overate a little, so she decided to be more careful with food. The blonde, continuing to enjoy the wine, already asked her not to pay attention to etiquette, and already asked the beauty about her wishes, which he could fulfill. But the princess only wanted to look around the castle, and now, a little shyly, she asked his permission to do so. Not understanding how she could ask for obvious things, Batiso was perplexed. However, he only replied that it was enough to ask Tarkin about such things. Continuing to deftly wield cutlery, she already noted that she was finally in the mood. It seemed that the blushing Celeste was ready to burst with happiness. The beauty thanked the emperor for such an interesting time. And now the man was puzzled as to how such little things could completely change the expression on her face. And she, remembering Tarkin's lessons about the need to keep her lips pursed, was already awkwardly covering them with her palms. Rising from the table, the emperor said goodbye. Speaking about the huge amount of work he had to do, Batiso promised to appear as soon as time allowed. Finishing the conversation, he hoped that the girl would focus on studying with Turkin. After all, he was eager to see results in the near future. The princess sighed, looking at the man's back as he left. But in reality, the girl felt that he was completely indifferent to her. She saw that Batiso was a smart and strong emperor. He obviously did not want to go through life with a stupid wife, but a beautiful wife. But one thing was clear, Batiso demanded, and the girl fulfilled all his wishes. At least it was much more pleasant than living in a dismal hovel and enduring beatings. Looking at the emperor's empty chair, she noted that he was so dry that he did not even wish his future wife good night. However, Celeste's next day was already beginning in the library. Surrounded by Turkana's care, she looked with surprise at the neat rows of books in golden covers. Taking out some of them, he was already talking about how her world would soon be turned upside down. "Does he really understand all the subjects?" the beauty asked. However, the smiling wizard, without hiding his pride, already said that there were few teachers in the empire who could surpass him. And the princess didn't even doubt it. She just blushed, realizing how persistent he would be as a teacher. With his hands behind his back, he was already talking about how the training would last exactly 1 year. And he would not be the only teacher. But a loud knock on the door, and the cheerful voice of a young woman who apologized for being late, interrupted the wizard's measured speech. It seemed that the sun, the forest, the flowers, and the birds had simultaneously made their way into the secluded place of the castle, and the red-haired creature was already complaining about the circumstances that had detained her. The revived princess was already answering the brunette that everything was fine, noting that it was the first time she had seen a girl with short hair from an aristocratic family, and Turkin was already introducing Miss Elizabeth Guido from the Count's Guido family. Curtsying, she lowered her eyes and apologized to the princess again. However, Celeste had already said that she was also pleased to meet him. She also asked if the matter that had delayed the girl had been resolved. But the next moment she noticed the condemning glances of her opponents. The princess understood that perhaps she had asked about it too directly, the girl thought. Elizabeth replied that perhaps everything would be decided soon, and the princess was already complimenting her hair. The pleased girl replied that now her hairstyle would become fashionable. Celeste couldn't calm down. It was obvious that the beauty's appearance had aroused genuine interest in her. Turkin already understood that he had fallen into a whirlwind of female emotions, and Elizabeth again thanked the princess for recognizing her free style. Celeste felt that she was already a little envious of the brunette. After all, she had freedom that the princess never had. However, the irritated Turkin asked the guest to calm down and sit down. While Celeste could not get rid of the thought that she could make friends with one of the aristocrats, realizing that she had to calm those present, she was already turning to Elizabeth. After all, Celeste was interested in what subject such a lady with character taught, but the next moment Turkin was already talking about Elizabeth's mission being completely different. After all, she would be the princess's personal servant. It seemed that the blonde was a little shocked, but the next moment she was already saying that she was happy with this choice, and Elizabeth was already rushing for tea. Celeste already understood that many issues were discussed over this wonderful drink, and now she asked the brunette how friendly the girl was with Turkin. Holding the cup, the maid was already saying that she considered him unlucky, and the princess thought that the girl was friendly with him. But suddenly, thinking, the beautiful brunette was already talking about the fact that in a world where everyone lies, perhaps Turkin can be trusted. Indeed, since her visits to Kalinef, the young man had become closer to her than anyone else, Celeste noted. Looking at the cheerful Miss Elizabeth, the blonde already understood that now she would not be bored. Without knowing why, the princess wanted to understand how much she could trust Turkin. After all, she knew absolutely nothing about him, except that he was from the Khalids and owned magic.